Angina pectoris, a type of chest pain that happens when the heart muscle doesn't get enough oxygen rich blood. Now, if someone is having this kind of a pain, doesn't matter whether they are rich or poor, the pain will be the same. The same applies to grief as well. Whether you are rich or poor, losing someone is always difficult. And what really defines how much grief you'll have is the closeness that you had with that person rather than the money. Sharing this same theme of ideology, Yashpal, the author of today's story, wrote Dukh Ka Adhikaar. This story highlights the disparity within the society based off of multiple factors, financially and superstitiously, at how our society is divided. It also highlights the main factor, that is grief. How everyone almost faces the same type of grief, but their reaction to it is highly different, which is dependent a lot more on their individual circumstances rather than the grief itself. Born in 1903, Yashpal was an amazing author. He was also a very active freedom fighter. He wrote a lot of books encouraging nationalities in the people within that point of time. He was not quite a fan of the social disparity that was rampant during that time. And according to his thought process, the only way to develop or progress was through this social equality. And one of the major ways of doing that was via financial equality, which is highlighted very well in this story, through which he's represented the highly divided state of the society at that time. Not gonna lie though, it's pretty same nowadays as well. I guess some things never change. Well, the story starts with our protagonist who's walking around the market where his eye catches a peculiar sight. Around the corner, there was a seller who was selling watermelons, and these watermelons were spread on a carpet on the road, and some of them even fell over the carpet and were lying bare on the road. But that was pretty common around the block. What was incredibly peculiar at that time was the seller herself. It was a lady, and what caught his eye mainly was that she was not really interested in selling those watermelons. She wasn't shouting out the prices, she wasn't trying to gather attention. Rather than, she was just sitting there with her head down over her knees, covered with her arms, and just crying and sobbing. This got Yashpal curious and he wanted some answers. Well, he could just ask her. But there was a problem. Or rather, I should say, there was a barrier in his way, and the barrier was his clothes. Now, he wasn't wearing some expensive clothes. Even in the illustration given in the book, you can see the clothes are pretty normal. But that also presents a huge barrier between the society that is actually settled versus the people who are just barely making their ends meet. This is wonderfully represented by one of the lines in the story, which I love, which says, जैसे वायु की लहरें कटी हुई पतंग को सहसा भूमि पर नहीं गिर जाने देती, उसी तरह खास परिस्थितियों में हमारी पोशाक हमें झुक सकने से रोके रहती है. The meaning of this line is basically when a kite who's just falling down, the wind doesn't allow it to properly fall down, it prevents it. Same way, the clothes that they wear. Now, obviously, the clothes here represent financial well-being of a person. So these clothes are not allowing him to go down the ladder of social hierarchy and talk to the women. Now, everybody would say, Harish, why doesn't he break the social norms and go and talk to her? But that is not the point of this story. What he is trying to represent is exactly what is happening right now, is that he is reluctant and not able to go and talk to her. That is what Yashpal wants to tell us. He's not an ideal protagonist that breaks the rules and whatever helps the woman out. But this is a dark and true reality of what society has to offer, even to this day. So how would he get answers? There's so much curiousness. A woman crying who's supposed to sit there and sell the fruits, she's just sitting there and crying, not even interested in selling one of them. Well, word spreads like fire among people. Yashpal did not have to ask around a lot. A lot of information he got just by hearing other people, which primarily were disgusted and very hateful towards the women. Why was that? Well, it turns out that her son had died recently. And a lot of these people were much worried about her selling the fruits during an unholy period called Suta, which is a religious period around 10 to 13 days after anyone's death or even birth. So, in which, you're considered to be impure. And a lot of people were just concerned about that. Plus, adding to that, she had just lost her son. She's supposed to be grieving and being sad. That was the crux of the situation. But our protagonist wanted to know a little bit more, and that is when he started to ask questions. The background of this woman was that she had a son around 23 years of age. His name was Bhagwana. He was married and he had 2 kids. If I remember correctly, I think it was a son and a daughter. So basically what he used to do was work on someone else's farmland and gather some money. They had their own watermelon farms, sort of. I don't know clearly. They used to gather watermelons as well. And some days, most of the days actually, it would be Bhagwana who would be sitting and selling it. But some days his mother, the old lady in question right now, would sit as well, sharing the workload. So at the end of the day, Bhagwana was the sole breadwinner of this family. And we all know what is going to happen next. The tragedy strikes. One day, early in the morning, when the sun hasn't even risen yet properly, Bhagwana goes out and tries to gather some watermelons to sell later. And he gets bit by a snake. The unfortunate events that happen after this is what leads to his death, because instead of going to a medic, the family panics and they call a snake charmer. So that person comes and obviously nothing happens and Bhagwana eventually dies. But one of the major incidents that happens all along this is that they spend remaining of their savings in donations to that snake charmer, and what is left is just Bhagwana laying on the floor dead. Now the thing is, there was a problem with the last rites. It's written in the story that जिंदा आदमी नंगा भी रह सकता है, परंतु मुर्दे को नंगा कैसे विदा किया जाए. So the issue there was that after spending all the savings, they had nothing left. They cannot perform the last rites on the clothes that he was wearing. They needed a new pair of clothes, I guess. Plus, their sole breadwinner had died. So who was going to put food on the plate? They had 2 kids who would wake up every single morning hungry. They were saddened by their father's death, but hunger is something that is inevitable. And no matter how sad you are, it creeps up on you eventually. And they were just kids. Plus, her daughter-in-law just contracted fever and she couldn't work as well. So it was her responsibility. Now she had to get up, wash her face off and muster all the courage up and gather the watermelons that are left and try to sell them. And she goes to the corner, sits around, sets up her shop, and that's where her courage finally gives up. She starts to realize what kind of situation she is in and what tragedy has struck her family, and she caves in, and instead of trying to sell the fruits, she starts crying unconsolably. This whole ordeal reminded Yashpal of another lady who was his neighbor when she had lost her son. He remembered that she could not get up from bed due to the grief for a whole month. She used to lay there and cry unconsolably and be depressed. Plus, everyone around the city got to know about her and sympathized with her and felt sad for her. Now, that's where the brilliance of writing comes in from Yashpal, is how he juxtaposes these 2 different stories and tells us what we want to know. And reading it now with all the maturity I have, I realize that we didn't really get to the essence of the story when we were just kids. I think in 10th grade it is in NCERT. So that's where he talks about these 2 women that have different limitations, or one has limitations, the other hasn't, in their reaction to grief. How one woman is able to feel sad for almost a similar loss these both women have faced, and the other one can't even cry in solace. Plus, there's yet another reflection on the society, and that's the reason why I talked about that, like everyone in the city got to know about her, which is a very random detail, but that's given in the story because that's given in the story to tell you that how society also reacts to your action differently, depending on your circumstances. That's exactly what happened with the neighbor, that she was grieving and that was expected of her, and the society, applauded her for that, sympathized with her, not necessarily applauded, but sympathized with her. Whereas with the old woman in the market, she just could not grieve. She had to go out there and sell those remaining fruits to get some money for the food that her family so desperately needs and the clothes that his dead son now desperately needs for his last rites. And in that case, the society does not sympathize with her, does not understand her situation, and, evidently so, feels very disgusted and hateful towards her. In my opinion, this story is truly heartbreaking. One of the most cruel aspects of this story is how grounded and how true this story is. It's not a big, tragedy that has happened, unbelievable tragedy, but it's something that happens on a regular basis. Plus, there are primarily three highlights that at the end I want to talk about. Is the first one when he talks about the clothing barrier that happens. And that's so great is because our author or the main protagonist is not a prince or a rich guy. He's just a normal man. He's just economically stable and he's just wearing normal day-to-day clothes. But these simple things or seemingly simple things create a huge barrier and at least give enough disparity for him to pose a barrier and make him feel reluctant to just talk to that woman. Secondly, how the society responds. So yeah, they're very judgmental and mostly look at superficial things that are happening rather than digging deep. And truly nobody has enough time to think a lot about you. Yeah, it's not a great picture of the society that we live in, but it's the truth. The third and the last, the point that is, the title of the story is Dukh ka Adhikaar, the right to be sad or the right to grieve. Now, why this title or why this story is so much important is because a lot of aspects of life that people correlate money with, grief is the last. Grief is the most overlooked part of money because you never hear people say that, okay, if I have money, I can feel sad or I can grieve better if I have money. Nobody says this. And that's why this hits a nerve or it hits a certain aspect of this, right that we talk about that is so great because this represents that you don't only need money to be happy, but also to feel sad, to be able to perform the last rites of someone close to you. You need that luxury too. And yeah, I leave you all to that. I will highly encourage you to go and read the story for yourself. It's very short and sweet, 3 pages, much shorter than this video. But yes, it gives a very cruel but very true picture into our society that we live in today, even to this day, whereas this story is probably, 60, 70 years old. That's it for this video. This was Dukh ka Adhikaar. And let me know down in the comments below, is there any other story that you remember during your school days that you would want to revisit? Thank you and have a great day, night, whenever you're watching this video. Bye-bye.